This is the simplest form of summarize function. This is our source table, and we want to group values from region and representatives columns to get something like this. So these are only distinct values from those two columns. It is the same result we would got if we place these two columns into rows into a pivot table. And for this, we can use summarize function. We just place our sample table as first argument, and then our columns as all other arguments. Now, in this case, we use summarize function on one table, but we can use summarize function on several tables. For that, we can go to Power Pivot, and here we have our sample table. This is our sample table, and that sample table has 11 distinct representatives in this column. Now, I used those representatives to create this table here, and then I have connected our two tables by relation. So I connected columns representatives and representatives detached. This is relationship with cardinality n to 1, and I connected our two tables. Now we can create this. Here we have the same table as the table here, but in this case we are using representatives detached column to create this part of table, and for that we just have to replace this representatives column with representatives detached. Now this will work only if this sample table is on n side of relationship. And we can also use summarize function for aggregations. Now here we have one aggregated table. We grouped everything by region, and then we created this column. Now for this column, we sum all the values from units column, and we gave a new value, a new name for our column, and we can also aggregate values from that other table in the same way. Now in this case, we got correct values. We have 6 representatives for central region, and if we have created an ordinary pivot table, we would got 11 in each row. This is because it is not possible for filter to propagate from n side to one side of relation, but we can use summarize to get this result. Now we also have helper function, that is rollup function. Here, this would be result if we have used only summarize. But if we wrap region and item columns in a rollup, we would also get these totals. We would get first grand total, then for region we would get subtotal, and for the last column in the list we wouldn't get subtotal. Now beside the rollup, we also have the rollup group. Now watch this example first. Here we have rollup with 3 columns. Again, we got our grand total, then we have a subtotal for region, then subtotal for representatives, and at the end for item we don't have subtotal, so it is important what is the sequence of columns inside of rollup function. Now, what if we want to have only subtotals for regions and not for representatives? In that case, all the columns that should be excluded from rollup should be wrapped inside of rollup group function. Here we have rollup, but region is the only column that is outside of rollup group function, and representatives and items are inside rollup group. So there will be no subtotals for representatives and items, only there will be subtotals for region. Now, if we watch this table, we can ask ourselves what rows are details and what rows are subtotals. For that, we're going to use this subtotal function. Now, this table is actually using rollup, but it is sorted. Now, this sorted table looks like pivot table. So this value here, 231, is actually some of these values here. And these 3 columns, they're made with this is subtotal function. Now, this is subtotal function will tell us whether some row is subtotal for values from that column that is used as argument in subtotal. For example, if we watch this value, we have true. Now we have true for is subtotal item column, and this is because values for items are totaled here, and this is why we get true here. Now in grand total, we sum the values both for region and for item, and this is why we have true on both places. And if we connect these two values with AND operator, if we and the result is true, in that case we would know that this row is actually a grand total. Now this is the same table, we just didn't order our values, so this is how it would like. So we have true in some of the columns for each subtotal and grand total, but for grand total we have true in all of the columns. Now summaries function is interesting because it is the only function that has both filter context and row context. Here we grouped our values by region and item, and then we created this column. Now this column is not aggregated. We are actually using a row context. We're using this expression here to create a new column. But this column is aggregated, and in it we are using a filter context. Now grouping. First, we have grouped our values by region and item, and then we want to group this table again to get a grouping just by region. Now, for this, we cannot nest summarize function. This is the consequence of the fact that we have created this new column. This column is created, and it cannot be used again in summarize function. Summarize function always needs to use original column from source table. In this case, we have to use another function group by to do outer grouping, and by it we can create our table. Now this is only important if we have some aggregations. If we don't have aggregation, if we have this simple example, then we can nest our summarize function. Now I'm going to refresh your memory. I will talk about advanced filter in Excel. Now, advanced filter is actually just a feature of Excel. It's not feature of Power Pivot, or it is not connected to DAX, but it is interesting because of one thing. This is first source table, and this is criteria. This criteria is saying filter this table so that only rows that has A in column 1 and 1 in column 2, or only rows that has B in column 1 and 3 and 1 in column 2 will remain. We will place these two tables as arguments in advanced filter dialog, and we will get our filter table. Now, why is this important? This is important because this criteria table, this is how we can actually represent our filter. So this filter is actually column 1 is equal to A, and column 2 is equal to 1, or column 1 is equal to B, and column 2 is equal to 1. So that is how we would write that criteria in DAX, but we can notice that it is the same as a table. And actually in DAX we can use one table to filter other table, just columns in those two tables needs to have the same lineage. So it is important to remember that filter context in DAX is actually a table. Now let's watch this example. Here we have one simple table that is created with summarize, and we have this value 243. Now what we expect here is that this value is created first by creating this filter context. We will filter all of our values by this region and by pen set, and then we will sum our units column. We can see that here. So we can filter this by center region and by pen set, and then we would just sum these values. So this would be our table. Only these two columns would be our filter context, but that is not the case. What is actually the filter context is all of this. So all of columns from these tables are actually filter context. Our filter is order date is equal to this, and the region is equal to this, and representative is equal to this, and then unit cost is equal to this, total is equal to this, or order date is equal to this, and so on. And this is why I used this criteria example to depict context filter, because it would be really troublesome to write such a complex filter. Now, why does summarize has such a complex filter? Well, the reason is because now we can manipulate with this filter. We can turn off some of the columns as filters, and we can change some other and something else. Now let me show you an example of that. Here we have another table. We grouped everything by region, and then that would be this here, and then we calculate how many distinct products are sold in these regions. Central region, we are selling all of the 5 items, but in East and West regions we are selling only 4 items. This is because we cannot, it is not allowed to us to sell pen set in West and desk in East for some reason. And then these are total number of units sold in these regions. So we have 1,600 or 200 sold in these regions. And now we want to see what is the share of each region in grand total. But for central region, we want to compare this value with grand total, which is sum of all of units that we have sold. In that case, we will see that ratio is 56%. But for West, we don't want to compare this value 221 with 2,121. We want to compare it with only a sale that is connected with those 4 products that are sold in West. One product is not sold, so the total is not 2,000. Total is 1,700. So how this filter works? Well, this is how we calculate values for this column. First, we sum everything from units column, but we use these filters. First, we removed all the filters from all the columns except the item column. Now, in this row, first we have the filter for West. Let's go to see that in this source table. We have a filter for West, and this is a filter that would be used if we haven't changed it with calculate function. So this is the filter. So this filter is saying use this day, this region, this representative, or use this, and so on. Now what we said is to remove all the filters from these columns, and the only filter that remains is this filter. This filter say take everything where there is a pencil or binder or desk or pen in item column. So this is our filter, and the only item that is missing is actually pen set. So let's remove all the filters. Let's remove pen set, and this is actually our filter. Not the whole table, but just this. How many units? 1,700. And that is the correct value. So this is everything that is sold except pen set. And now we can compare this value and this value. We can use this expression to do that, and we get that this is 13%. And it is the same for East. For East, we only excluded item desk. And in this case, when we sum these ratios, we will not get 100%, but 102% because we change this total. And this is how we can use summarize function to manipulate filter context. And because of this complex filter context that is used with summarize function, we can expect to have some performance problem with summarize function, and we can in that case choose to use some other function. There are other functions in DAX that can be used for grouping.